It's not like in a bad way, but they do have a very strong love for the country here. So they look at me, when I speak so fluently, they don't look at me as a foreigner. Like I'm just sort of like one of them, and that's kind of flattering. That's part of my past life energy here. So but so then the final piece is to remind them that hey, this is not just. They'll even say subconsciously, it's like a Freudian slip. They'll say, well, how does this relate to in terms of Earth or humanity? How does this in terms of Japan, how do they, they'll say Japan instead of humanity or the Earth. So you have to remind them that this is a global thing. So it's like, finally connecting the whole Earth together as a one human consciousness is something I have to sometimes remind them. But yeah, that's really changed over the recent years. Yeah. Eventually was guided, my first actual contact experience was at Mount Adams, and at the East Eddy Ranch. So that was very amazing. It just so happened to be, I was in the Pacific Northwest at a friend's wedding in Portland, Oregon. And then I was guided to go out there, and it was just a couple of volunteer staff and myself, and in a period of just like 3 or 4 hours, I had a really amazing life turning experience. So that was really one of the where the kind of power switch was put on from reading and just information to the actual experience. And then when I came, that was the night before I flew back to Japan from the U.S. trip. So I immediately brought that back to Japan, and within a few months, the excitement of that started to slowly fade away into everyday life, but then the ships began to appear in the skies of Tokyo, like even in broad daylight. I was getting like major flashes, and they seemed to be saying like, remember that feeling of being so high and excited, from this spiritualism, from this cosmic consciousness. I know we all have busy lives, but it's amazing to the material is such a great portal and doorway, and it leads to so many different amazing other connections. So people shouldn't feel restricted by it. Any of the films or any of the books are they're just all, they have so many doorways to take in your own unique direction. So it's I'm looking forward to the new generation of ambassadors out there in every country.
CE5 app, CE5 contact,
the Disclosure Project,
CE5 app,
CE5
Disclosure Project,
CE5 outreach program,
the Disclosure Project.
Together we are creating an alert and knowledgeable citizenry, one community at a time.
CE5 Ambassadors Podcast.
Don't forget to educate your local communities about CE5 or the DPIA Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, passing around cards or brochures or any information that you can provide to people.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. Today we have with us Greg Sullivan from JCETI, stands for Japanese Center for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. He's been doing this for quite a long time now. He's been interacting with his community, and he's really been out there, boots on the ground, and kind of leading the way out there in Japan. So thanks for being here today with us, Greg, and appreciate you coming on board.
Hey, hi, Frida. And thanks for having me. Good to see you guys again. That's good morning from Kyoto, Japan.
So we know you're short on time today, so we're just going to jump right into it. We're curious, how did you get started into the whole contact, phenomena? Was it early on, or could you just walk us through that?
Sure. Yeah, I always had an amazing love for the stars, and I grew up in upstate New York, and at times in the winter we had power outages. 3 days, one time even up to 1 week. So we had every time we went outside, there was no light pollution at all during those big power outages, and so I was always looking at satellites flying around and the constellations visible each changing season, and I always just found this affinity, maybe it was the guides at that point, some sort of affinity from the stars looking down upon me, like a protection type of energy as well. And then I was slowly guided through different books and stuff. I'm writing that story right now this year, and I brought this back with me from the U.S. last month, and this is one of the original seeds for me, a very strange book written by someone in my father's office in New York City called The Occult Connection. It was, I originally started with the Majestic 12, all this type of stuff that was in the UFO literature and subculture at the time. But this one had a little bit more of a deeper take on it with the ancient Egypt and Sumeria and all that stuff. So it was a little bit of a taster of a lot of different other research. So yeah, that sparked my interest. And then once I was in my early 20s, after college, I finally had my original first experiences in both Japan and US. And then eventually was listening to Coast AM. There was a early YouTube channel that was phenomenal. They had an archive of Coast to Coast shows. So I kind of had to take a double take because I found the channel and then I was listening and listening to, Art Bell and George Norrie. And I was thinking, wait a minute, I recognized Art's voice from when I was like in elementary school. We used to wake up in the middle of the night and just to wake up for the sake of waking up, like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. During a sleepover or slumber party. And then when the radio alarm went off, that show was on. And so we kind of just sat there in a daze, in the middle of the night listening. And it's like, whoa, what are these people talking about? Like paranormal and UFOs. And, of course, maybe there was some of that abduction stuff mixed in there. But we were just fascinated by it all. And then when I was in early years in Japan, I connected to Wi-Fi and I had my early internet, early YouTube, and I stumbled upon this treasure trove of a channel that had just like hundreds of coast shows up on audio. So I got hooked and I was listening to like 4 to 6 hours a day. It's like when I first started playing guitar, I practiced like 8 hours a day every day. I kind of get fixated. And that really sparked the whole thing. So then I found out about places like Mount Shasta, Mount power spots like Mount Adams and maybe Sedona through that. And of course, Montauk, near where I grew up in Connecticut, Montauk, Long Island. And then, of course, the work of Dr. Greers. So the Disclosure Project, I think that was another one that I stumbled upon where I kind of like had remembered seeing a small snippet on the news or maybe even in real time. And then I kind of like, again, did a double take and said, oh man, how did I not see how important this was? So I was able to finally, use those archives to really go over the material in detail. Yeah. And then finally that led to me becoming a CSETI member and getting the training materials, the working book materials where I kind of like, was intuitively guided that, I needed to do this in Japan. And so it was a total like, 180 turn from what I was doing before, like music and just English teaching. So then it was sort of my life's path and all the things I ever wanted to do in music or other genres that kind of it was able to do through this work. So it's been a really amazing soul journey. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. When did you transition from, I guess, your studies to going into your first, contact experience? Was it early or did you like learn enough and then you're like, I got to try the CE5 or, what happened with that?
Yeah, thank you. It was actually about a 4 or 5 year period. Pretty intense. Yeah, it's a very condensed period. So like I think in 2006 probably the research started in 2006 or so, 2007. I was like, listening to Coast on the train, on headphones, on my smartphone and at home on Wi-Fi. So, and then eventually was guided. My first actual contact experience was at Mount Adams, and at the ECETI Ranch. So that was very amazing. It just so happened to be, I was in the Pacific Northwest at a friend's wedding in Portland, Oregon. And then I was guided to go out there and it was just a couple of volunteer staff and myself, and in a period of just like 3 or 4 hours, I had a really amazing life turning experience. So that was really one of the where this kind of power switch was put on from reading and just information to the actual experience. And then when I came, that was the night before I flew back to Japan from the U.S. trip. So I immediately brought that back to Japan, and within a few months, the excitement of that started to slowly fade away into everyday life. But then the ships began to appear in the skies of Tokyo, like even in broad daylight. I was getting like major flashes, and they seemed to be saying like, remember that feeling of being so high and excited, from this spiritualism, from this cosmic consciousness. And then eventually, I actually went home to the U.S. And then the contact continued and became even deeper. And that's when I finally got the CE5 materials. It was in 2009. So it was yeah. And then finally in 2010, I was this is a major turning point, was I never planned to go back to Japan, but with things in my personal life and I was sort of like, a couple of things, like I had to make some very difficult decisions. And then I was guided to go back, and I brought the whole, I had a laser pointer, my 2 walkie-talkies, and the C-setting manual, and all of Dr. Greer's books, and I went back, and then it became obvious that it was something that I definitely wanted to continue doing. And then once then the first contact event here, or first CE5, was my birthday, July 19th, 2010. And so at that point, it was still going to be like maybe like something I could do as a passive hobby or just here and there on weekends. But what really the final catalyst was the 2011 311 earthquake and Fukushima disaster. And so that was like a lot of light workers here in Japan were mobilized and kind of like went online, so to speak. Your star seeds, light workers, and people who never thought they would be standing in front of a crowd, talking about something. Were had the impetus to really, put everything online and just be out there in the spotlight. My initial work raised raised the eyebrows of some people in the publishing industry, and I had a couple introductions, and then during the 3/11 disaster, we were in the middle of creating my first book, which was a discussion book. Like I was the guest, being interviewed by on another senior lecturer. She was more of a conspiracy writer, author, but we had that book came out, and so I was like in the middle of a move to Tokyo, and then that disaster happened. And so I kind of like had to retract all my things, and I went back to West Japan, and they kind of had cleared the decks had been cleared. So then I was like really thrown into the deep end. And so it was definitely a lot of trial by fire. But yeah, thank goodness the Japan has an amazing community of authors, speakers, in all genres that they travel around the country, and it's like also the film screening. The local directors have a lot of film screening networks. So all that stuff played an enormous part in helping to localize the Disclosure Project information and the other stuff I was doing. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. It seems like you went from, going through a period of time where you're conducting extensive research, learning, and kind of, getting a better understanding of all this. And then you put it to action, had your contact experience. And then at some point the light switched on. You said, I got to do something about this. I was over in Japan, and, this information needs to be relayed over to them. And it's funny because Frida always talks about how this information really needs to be translated into other languages and needs to be shared with the other languages out there. And it's just amazing that you've done such a great work in this. And I'm curious, how receptive and how involved have, people over there been? It seems as if it's really taken on over there.
Oh yeah, great question. Thank you. It's hard to encapsulate those early years. You could seriously make a movie about. It was like so much emotion, and there was so many. In my personal life was completely intertwined with the whole journeys. And it was sort of like the Indy Jones scene where you have to just take the leap of faith, and so once I did, I was immediately greeted with the next step, and being divinely guided. And so I had I had a lot of gusto. I had a lot of wind in my sails at that time. So I had enough inspiration to definitely not waver or anything. So then basically, as you said, it was like really a committed journey, but also I was also learning on the job. So once that first CE5 occurred, I slowly became I was doing both, kind of like personal contact and the translation of all the materials, and then also slowly started to be invited to go places. So the word of mouth was spreading organically, So basically, at first, more so than the UFO community. So my first, I often tell people, like one of the first visits to the bookstore I made on that sudden return in 2010, in early 2010, was that I was so surprised that like none of the Dr. Greers' books were translated. There was only one, and there was no other discussion occurring about disclosure. So it was really kind of strange to me, and there was reasons for that I found out later. But basically, we were really skiing in fresh powder, fresh tracks. So it was amazing, phenomenal. I was ahead of the curve in that way. So as you said, like just the fact that it doesn't get translated means that it's not available. So that's with the language barrier here. There are not a lot of native English speakers here at all, and although Japanese study English and they can read a fair bit, through their studies in elementary, junior and senior high school, it's they have a kind of a mental block about it. So they sort of just, if it's not easy to understand, they don't touch it. So yeah, our services are kind of like presence as the liaison there, and the translator was really growing rapidly. And amongst the regular spiritual community, they were loving it. So a lot of the other related genres kind of picked us up, like people, and then of course there was a international cultural exchange as well. So because they were happy to share, I was being invited by a lot of the Shinto type of people, and a lot of the hidden history of Japan. There's a lot of researchers here about the hidden history in Japan, and ancient history. And so those type of folks we were doing a lot of collaborations together. Yeah, it was, and then to be able to go around and see those sacred sites and experience the different nooks and crannies. And I was always had my antenna out for CE5 locations. So I was becoming like a walking map of the country, and you're always looking for the great spot and everything. On the other hand, though, I look back and I think that I was really like my initial struggle was to separate my understanding with the participants' understanding. So like I had a very high level understanding already with experience, to along with that, but I had to really struggle to try and like downgrade that and try and keep it at a simple level. Like I would always ramp up and try and talk about. I was subconsciously often referring to things that I was most interested in. So the culture in Japan is, even in their own publishing industry, the easier to understand it is, the better. So that became a really amazing language study as well, to kind of like how simple can I make this? And then I was getting a lot of inspiration from the guides as to this could be shown this way, and this could, like a puzzle, like a Rubik's cube. Yeah, so that was amazing. And then as time went on, it was so funny because I got the phrases that I was using and the stuff that I was kind of putting into my lectures here. After a few years went by, Dr. Greer was saying the same thing. So it was like we're totally like connected to the same consciousness network, not to say that it came here first, but it's like that he was reiterating things he had said before, and this new, people need that that simple language and the simple references and metaphors. It's kind of like puts it across a lot easier. Yeah,
it's kind of like the way that we're kind of conditioned in nowadays on social media and stuff. Everything's short films, short videos, short everything, and it's real simple, basic, and to the point. It really grabs people's attention, and I mean, it can be used for good or bad. In this case, it's definitely been a good thing.
It's also my experience. Depending on who I'm with, in terms of when I'm inviting new people to CE5, depending on who I'm talking to, I sometimes have to simplify it and my explanation. For some people, I might go into the more deep end of kind of explaining, the quantum, the higher, low dimensions, and all of that. For some people, I can do that, but at times I kind of have to just cut all of that out, just have the more very simple, with an open heart and mind. You are connecting with the cosmos and then inviting our ET friends over, and same with when I do a guided meditation when a guest over to do a CE5, I kind of do like walk through guided meditation of, okay, visualize that you're walking through this beautiful valley with grass and flowers and birds and stuff, and kind of this visualization of because the majority of people had never meditated in their lives, so their heads are like busy, and since they're not used to meditation, there's a danger falling asleep. So I also learned that I have to adjust the CE5, the meditation, and the style depending on who I'm with. So I'm sure you have a lot of experience in doing that, Greg.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, and I think we had, I think we have the energy is really a big component. Like once you have a gathering about this in general, the ETs are there in so many different levels. So I felt like, what needs to be said was said, and everyone takes in what they need to take in. So I really started to really trust in the process. Yeah. So I agree. Yeah. It's like a slow, it's like an energetic kind of support. And on the other hand, the other big thing that helped me on the flip side was that although my language skills were pretty good, they were now getting into overdrive because I was learning all the language and the spiritual lingo and translating all that stuff. And then, of course, the Japanese audience was so helpful because they're very attentive and very quiet and focused and coherent. And they even if they don't, there was no fear factor either. So people were just we were already on the same page about the positive spiritual contact. So the people who were there in the first place weren't doubting Thomases or just nuts and bolts people. So everything was so organic, and it was a great process for me. And then finally I was able to create the lecture. In every CE5 in the early days, I would do a nearly 2-hour lecture indoors ahead of time with the slides. So just to have this every time I was going through the slides and constantly updating them and giving the background, from the 2001 start. Speaking of which, I had an amazing synchronicity. A friend of mine in high school in Connecticut, his dad was an actor. They moved out from LA, and one of his good friends was Keir Delay, who was Dave in 2001. So I had an initial experience in my teenage years meeting that actor, and we were in, so he had kind of like words of inspiration for us too. So that was really cool. So 2001 was sort of like the monolith, the turning point for the whole UFO research community.
Nice. Greg, what you've been doing for this many years, how is it, what is your outlook on seeing others beginning to do what you've already been doing? And that is translating, this information to people in communities around the world. What are your thoughts, and what are some of the suggestions you may have for those people who are just beginning to get into doing that?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I think definitely, like I said, the gathering of groups, and the real interaction, whether it's at your local library or just having like a cafe, little screening of some sort. I think that's really important now, more so than ever after the Corona lockdown and everything. So I think that Japan was really, being a small country, easy to travel around in, and that was a really, really easy thing to do here in Japan. And so yeah, the fact that it's translated alone is great. That's and the fact that with the experience we had is that even the professional translators don't know the ins and outs of the material. So it requires someone who's at least somewhat familiar with the old archive footage from the Disclosure Project, or has some background of the references being made. Because that can help to avoid any confusion. Because we had a lot of, some of the film companies asked, they did an initial translation with the translating company into Japanese, and then we went through and did a cleanup, and then provided the finalized subtitles, even to Netflix Japan. They used our final titles. That really helps, because in a language barrier as big as English or Japanese, it really makes all the difference. And if it's sort of there, it's not all there. And they're kind of a perfectionist culture in that way here. So it depends on the culture, I guess. But the better the translation, the smoother things are going to go. And then I think, I was so happy to hear when we had that early meeting, and we were talking offline there with the three of us, Ricky and you, Nate, where you were mentioning that, people were thinking more and more about, renting some sort of, having a little template for people to do simple CE5 outings and simple gatherings. So I think that's, and the work you did with the outreach, on the college campus was phenomenal. So having those flyer materials and the pamphlets that Frida designed is amazing too. So I think people shouldn't be shy. I think it's like, with all that's happened in the news and with the congressional hearings, I think a lot of people are ready for that. Whether it's a university, whether it's a town hall, whether it's a little rental room, somewhere a little. I think it would be amazing for people to start to take more initiative, even if it's just 5 people who turn up. That's no problem. It's the fact that you did it. It starts to snowball. Yeah, I think being active in the local community is going to be really important from now on. Because it's actually simpler than being out there on YouTube, and you're a face. Just being a face online is cool in some ways, but then you don't even know who you're talking to. So that's where the community interaction is really powerful.
Absolutely, thanks for that. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I highly, highly respect you, Greg. I find it amazing what you have done. It's one thing to doing what you do in England or America or Canada, in any of those English-speaking countries, because all that materials, all those books and movies and all of that is already available. So you don't need to do any of that work. But you had to do the hard work, the foot on the ground hard work of translating everything, and even writing your own books, and then not just translating in a completely different language. Japanese is considered one of the hardest languages to learn as an opposite language from English, but also localizing all these materials into a Japanese context where they have a completely different culture and mindset and temperament.
It's a very multifaceted thing.
All the countries in the West.
Several aspects to the answer, and I think for one thing is that
and doing all those workshops,
so me being a new face
and
on the
teaching
scene,
people, and then doing it for
American.
How long now? 10 years.
Information that was really beneficial at first. So I was told that in the past, is pretty.
I think you are the most incredible,
a lot of the old sort of really, quite frankly, disinformation
ambassador on this planet, in my opinion. So I highly respect you.
They call that kind of occult. So in the spiritual community, I was a very familiar phenomenon in the fact that a lot of the Western information
doing a CE5 under Northern Lights, that is
an
an experience. I have had the pleasure of doing that for a couple couple of times while
disclosure
the
stuff,
ETs are
I couldn't
flying
believe
by
no one
and
had done it
crashing and
before.
stuff. So
So our
that's
role
quite an
was obvious.
experience.
I tell people like I had a reservation on
So
a
yeah,
table, like there was my seat was
thank you
already
so much for
reserved, like
having
I just
us
had to show up
or
and
coming to
there
this
was a seat
podcast.
there with my name on it. So and that was one easy thing. But then of course on the flip side, like how can I make this into Japanese context? So some of our earlier supporters were involved in supporting other speakers, so they were in tune with the nitty gritty of really reaching the audience. So we had a lot of late night powwows and talk during travel and just focusing on how can we make this better and constantly streamlining the material. And so yeah, that tying that into the Japanese culture and into their point of view was really an initial challenge. And so because the information is so Western based. So then of course that finally the group experience in the field with the actual contact work is the ultimate kind of like synthesizer, and that is just a joy, where the coherence level is already so high, and you're connecting with the land and the people there, and like when we have the local food and take a hot spring bath, we connect with the land already and before the work by taking a bath, before we go often, we travel from a distance to get to the place, and then as we unwind before dinner, most people take a bath, so we chat in the bath, and there's so many different places we can connect and do that kind of pre-work, before going out into the field. And then, it's just, everything just, it was almost, a lot of times on autopilot, I didn't have to work super hard where we had already ships already nearby or right when we arrived, some things happened and we had a lot of high level of activity. So really kind of my personal modus operandi was really, I want to just show them, I want to have them experience the phenomenon directly. So the lecture and everything was all in preparation for some sort of, climactic or an event that we could have everyone experience, So my standard was like, was it a success or a partial success? That was like, depending on how many people had the experience, were like, oh, we definitely saw something anomalous, something ET. How many people really took that home? That was my gauge. And the other thing, the final point of that is then, of course, with any country that has a one major capital city, whether it's like Paris, the Parisians versus the countryside French, or it's the same thing here where Tokyo is, obviously it's the largest city in the world, and compared to every other city here, it's a megalopolis. So the individual ego of people from that city is stronger than, of course, others in the countryside. So a lot of the places we were going to were really what they call inakas, like out in the boondocks, very countryside. So a lot of small satellite cities. So those events were way easier to do because you didn't have to do a lot of people had less of a degree of separation. And also they had less of that kind of like, protective barrier around themselves, like that most city people do unconsciously. So I noticed that, yeah, there was that difference too. So during the Tokyo events were really good training for me to be to hold the group energy. It was harder to hold the group energy, but also it was inspirational to have the power in numbers of that many people there, and people who are people in the city are more researched and more informed as well. So the type of things that they were expecting of me, or the information sharing was were very quite colorful as well. So yeah, it was so many elements to that. Yeah, and the final thing, once you hit there are some people who are really like tunnel vision on. They're very nationalist, sort of like with the whole Shinto, and it's not like in a bad way, but they do have a very strong love for the country here. So they look at me, and when I speak so fluently, they don't look at me as a foreigner. Like I'm just sort of like one of them, and that's kind of flattering. That's part of my past life energy here. So so then the final piece is to remind them that hey, this is not just. They'll even say subconsciously, it's like a Freudian slip. They'll say, well, how does this relate to in terms of Earth or humanity? How does this and that? And then they'll say, in terms of Japan, how do they, they'll say Japan instead of humanity or the Earth. So you have to remind them that this is a global thing. So it's like, finally connecting the whole Earth together as a one human consciousness is something I have to sometimes remind them. But yeah, that's really changed over the recent years. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that. I know you're short on time here, and I think it's just great what you're doing, and it's very inspiring. And we hope to be able to get more people to jump into this and do what they can for their communities. We'd like to share maybe your upcoming book and maybe even the past books that you've put out there, and we'll show those on the screen. And we look forward to having you again. I know we discussed having a part 2 in the near future, and we got lot more to discuss, of course. And just for those who are listening, whether you're new to this or if you're already an established ambassador, if you're new, we highly recommend that you look into this and do your due diligence and see what you can find and see what maybe find the importance of what we're discussing here. And then if you're already an established ambassador, we really hope that you understand that it's really your responsibility. If you're aware of all these things, it is your responsibility to raise awareness in your community. And so I hope that holds true, and you can do what you can.
Good to see you. It's great to connect, and I know we all have busy lives, but it's amazing to the material is such a great portal and doorway, and it leads to so many different amazing other connections. So people shouldn't feel restricted by it. Any of the films or any of the books are, they're just they have so many doorways to take in your own unique direction. So it's I'm looking forward to the new generation of ambassadors out there in every country.
Thanks, Greg. We know you got to go, so we'll let you go. Get out of here. Thanks
yeah,
again.
have a great spring, guys. I'll hope to talk to you soon on part 2. Cheers. Thank you. Arigato.